I'm Mike Kelly from Project Healing Waters, Omaha, and tonight we have a very special guest. Phil Rowley will tie a few of his favorite stillwater fly patterns and answer any questions that you have. Phil is well known for his knowledge of stillwater fly fishing and fly tying. His YouTube channel has over 200 high quality tying videos. It's called Phil Rowley. It's spelled Rowley. I called it Rowley for years. Phil Rowley Fly Fishing is the name of the YouTube channel. He was a commercial tyer. He's written articles for almost every major fly fishing publication in North America. He's written 4 books, including the Orvis Guide to Stillwater Trout Fishing. His first book, Fly Patterns for Stillwaters, was a bestseller. He has 5 instructional DVDs. He provides online learning through his Stillwater Academy. He conducts fly fishing schools, tying clinics, and seminars at fly fishing shows all over North America. For television, he's appeared on British Columbia Outdoor Sports Fishing Adventures, New Fly Fisher, and several others. In 2014, he was awarded the Lifetime Achievement Award from Fly Tyer magazine. And then in 2017, he was awarded the Jean Guy Coat Award for his contribution to Canadian fly tying. He was a competition fly fisher in that year and member of the medal winning team at the Canadian Fly Fishing Championships. So this will be a great opportunity for you to learn from a fly fishing celebrity. Feel free to ask questions, like I said, along the way. And okay, you ready to go, Phil?
So everybody, I'm unmuted. Everybody can hear me? Yeah, so
Yes,
again, Mike, thanks for having me here. It's love doing these kind of things. So tonight I'm just going to tie a few, 2 or 3 of my, some of my favorite stillwater flies that have a wide application. I stayed away from the chironomids or midges, but after talking to Mike prior to, maybe I should have thrown one of those in too, because they're certainly use a lot of them out west, but we also fish a lot of other things too. And these flies also have applicability to other species as well, because where I live, I lived in British Columbia, furthest province west in Canada, for 35 years, and about 20 years ago I moved one province to the right, to the east in Alberta, where I live now. And we not only have rivers, streams, and lakes for trout, but we've also got other species as well, lake whitefish, walleye, pike, other things as well, and they're fun to chase on the fly as well, and they'll eat some of this stuff as well. So I'll just ebb and flow back and forth, wide and close, and we'll go through each one. The first one I'm going to do is a balanced leech, sort of a fly style that was originally originated by a gentleman by the name of Jerry McBride, who is a member of the Inland Empire Fly Fishing Club in Spokane, Washington. And Jerry realized that when you suspend flies under a strike indicator, which is a very popular method for fly fishing in general, but especially in lakes nowadays, a traditional bead head would hang vertically, and yet most food sources in lakes, leeches and bait fish in particular, would move horizontally. So wanted to strive to get a fly to hang horizontally. So what he did is, and you'll see in a second, is he put his bead, the tungsten bead these flies use, on a pin and extended that out in front of the hook eye. And originally Jerry tied these flies on down eye hooks. And when I saw this pattern style and got to know Jerry, talking with him back and forth, I added the jig hook, which I'm using here today. So there's a wide range. When I first started tying these on jig hooks, the only hooks sizes you could do were 10s and 8s, because that was the smallest jig hook we could find, because they were used primarily for bass and panfish. And they were light wire, so they weren't very sturdy. But now with the popularity of Euro nymphing and jig hooks in general, there's lots of good quality jig hooks out here. So I'm using in this case, a Daiichi 46 99. Does that look 99? It looks backwards to me. Maybe it's right. Um,
It
and
looks
I
right
also,
here.
okay, it looked backwards to me on the camera, but maybe that's just the way it's showing. Um, and that's a good strong jig hook. I mostly tie this in this one size 10. And this hook has served me well across Canada where I fish, across the States when I get down and fish there, and down into Argentina. And those trout down there in Argentina, in Jurassic Lake, where I go every year with the hosted trips I do, they can put a real beat down on fly hooks because you're fishing to fish that average 12 plus pounds, and also are you're fishing like 16-pound tippet, so your hook actually becomes a crucial part of the catching fish. And if you have a light wire hook, it's just going to bend out. So that's what I'm going to start. I'm going to use some of the nano silk. I like using this. It's thin and strong, and it's great for dubbing loops because you can really spin them up tight. So I'm just going to put the base layer down. Now, if you've never tied with nano silk or any of these gel spun threads, they are a little slippery on a bare hook. So usually, you know, if you're using a wax thread, you can just do a few wraps and it'll grip. I've just some tires put a base of thread down, a base of super glue down. I just wrap it on a few more times and it seems to hold. And when you cut it, I tend to cut, if you saw there, with the backs of the scissors and kind of push through it with the thread under tension, and it cuts through. If you nip it, it can sometimes fray a little bit. So I've just put a base layer of thread down for subtraction. Just going to bring the tying thread back up just before it falls off into that downturned eye. And the reason we're using the jig hook here is this fly sits and fishes upside down, hook point up. When you tie it on a standard down eye hook, which you can still do as opposed to this hook, the risk is if you're not careful, you'll obscure the hook eye. So you'll have a wonderful balanced fly, but you just won't be able to tie it on. So I joke that that's the ones I give to my buddies that say I never give them any flies. But the jig hook, all we're using that for is to so when we're finished the fly, the hook eye's exposed and we can tie it on. So it doesn't matter whether it's a 60-degree jig hook like this or a 90-degree. It doesn't matter. So the angle of the return on the hook is immaterial. It's just that when you're finished, that hook eye sticks out and is visible and you can tie the fly on. So this uses an extension to move the push a tungsten bead, and it has to be tungsten because tungsten's got twice the mass of brass, and it'll tip the fly horizontal. So we need to put an extension on here. And originally I used to use a straight pin, which you can certainly still do, just a common sewing pin. And but you have to cut that to length, and typically the length I would use would be if I was to cut them, and this is the kind of fly you build kind of production style, I would cut the pin from a distance from this hook eye to this hook point and just sit there with a bunch of side cutters and cut them all to that length. The drawback to this is A, it's an extra step, and B, no matter how good you are, it tends to leave a ragged edge to your fly, to the pin, which is, as you probably know, you tying flies, this thread loves to find sharp objects to break itself on, and it would catch there and break. So now I use what's called a sequin pin, which is a small, already cut to length pin, and I get these at Michael's. They come in gold or silver, and it doesn't really matter. The pin really isn't visible because it gets enveloped by the tungsten bead, which I'm putting on now just off camera, and I'll bring it back in. But I've got a tungsten bead, and this bead, the size of the bead varies on the hook. If it's a lighter wire hook, you could get away with a 7/64. So what is that, 2.8 millimeters? It's kind of ironic because Canada's been a metric country since I was grade 7, which I've been confused as far as measurements and things go for years. I'm a hybrid. I'm half metric, half imperial. We still measure our beads in fractional equivalents. So this is a 1/8 bead, which I think is 3.2 millimeters. So I've got this on the pin with the wide open end facing the front, so it envelops the pin head. If you look at some of my earlier tying videos on my YouTube channel, I used to flip the bead back the other way. It really doesn't matter. I just think the fly looks better with the pin head kind of enveloped. So I'm going to lash this on the shank. And years ago when I first started tying these flies, I would do test balances. But I've learned that if you extend this pin, so you could envision you could get 2 more beads on this pin between the back of the bead you see there and the hook eye, the fly will be in a balanced state. And it doesn't have to be absolutely perfectly balanced. So this fly hangs more or less horizontal, because when you've got this fly attached to your leader and suspended under an indicator, the surface chop influences how this fly moves. So if there's a bit of a chop on the surface, the fly is going to bounce and undulate anyway, but more or less horizontal is fine. Fish aren't out there with laser levels and slide rules and those kind of things. So I'm just lashing this on, and this is where this nano silk comes in handy, because I can use firm wraps and just cover this assembly that I'm building here, this chassis I call it, and just back and forth and build it like so. And then for added durability, I'll put a little touch of brushable super glue on here. And this is Gorilla super glue, not my favorite. It's a bit syrupy. I like either the Crazy Glue brand or Loctite, but when I ran out to get some glue because I had ran out of the other stuff, that's all they had. So I would lash this on like this, and you can put a few extra wraps in as well. And then I would typically whip finish this and set it aside and go build another one. So I would build a bunch of these chassis, just like if you were tying a heavily weighted stonefly with lead or lead wire substitute underneath. You'd build those lead underbodies first and then come back to them once those are all complete. The other benefit of the sequin pin is because it comes with a naturally tapered point, there's less risk of you accidentally fraying or damaging your tying thread. Not really an issue with this nano silk because it's tough stuff to break, but regular threads, which you can certainly use on this, it can be a bit of a problem. Now, years ago, again, if you go to my first YouTube channel, the original Bruise Leach, which is what we're tying tonight, up on there, I used to come in and then cover the pin with thread and push it tight against the bead like this. And then after a while, a little light bulb went on in my head and said, why are you doing that? Because as you see when we build the body on this fly, it's a dubbed body. It pushes the bead naturally against the head as part of the tying process. So it made it kind of a redundant step. So that's the chassis of a balanced leech or any balanced fly. And you can tie balance, we tie balanced leeches with the first. Now we do balanced minnows, balanced damsels, balanced mayflies. And you can even now with these new inverting beads or head turner beads, you can use these on a jig hook. And if you attach, or even a slotted bead, you can get these flies to balance if you use a clinch knot to attach the fly to your leader, as opposed to the non-slip loop knot, which is what I use the majority of the times. When you cinch a clinch knot tight to the hook eye, straight down like this, and then actually tweak the knot back so it's pointing more at the hook point, that fly will suspend in a balanced fashion. Now, of course, if you hook a fish, it's going to get out of whack, or you're a bit of an aggressive caster, your casting motion can put the fly out of position. But again, even if it hangs on a bit of an angle, it's not the end of the world. But this is a true balanced fly, and I still fish them both ways. I'm just building my fly inventory for my trip to Argentina at the end of this month, and balanced flies are a common component, especially this one. So now the rest is just tying. So for the tail on this fly, I'm going to use some Select Marabou. And when it comes to marabou for my stillwater flies, I like these mature plumes with a thick stem, not your strung marabou that tends to be more fine fibered. Strung marabou, or blood quills as they're often referred to, came from the turkey when it was harvested, which is the polite word for killed. It's very fine fibered because it still had blood going up into the quill. This is a mature plume, thick quilled, so you can't wind it around the hook. But these fibers here in this middle third, sort of the sweet spot of the plume, are what I'm going to use for the tail. But you can see here, this falls off on a slope. So I'm just going to strip those out of the way because the tips aren't the same length. So I'm just going to strip those out of the way. And then I'm going to use sort of this section here for the tail. So how I do this is I'm not going to strip this off in one aggressive strip because chances are I'm going to get the tips sort of misaligned. So what I like to do is strip, right? And then what I've stripped, I fold onto what I haven't stripped and just kind of roll the marabou off the stem using deliberate movements like this. And then I'm going to get, you know, a plume, a pinch of marabou like this, that the tips are more or less aligned. Because personally, I don't like to pinch a marabou tail to length for these flies. So I've got a couple of longer strands here. I can pull them back in and do a little bit. If there's a few out of the way, a few tips that are kind of ragged, you can do some moderate pinching, I guess. But for the most part, I don't think the fish really care. So we're just going to try and make sure if there's a few misaligned here when I roll them up. And I'm going to tie in this tail. And because you're dealing with a balanced fly, the tail length is important. You actually, and I'll show you when we air balance, the difference between when it gets wet and balances, is you don't want the tail too long because you're going to affect the balance of the fly. So I've got a tail that I'm going to tie in that's roughly from the end of the pin to the bend of the hook. So I've got that measurement there in my right hand. I'm going to come in with my left thumb and forefinger, transfer that measurement now. So there's the tail, roughly shank length, or pin to bend length sticking out the back. I'm going to come, and that's going to get transferred to here. Then I'm going to come in with my left thumb and forefinger and pinch it. Slide my right thumb and forefinger to where the thread is hanging. Re-grip it with my left thumb and forefinger, and then I'm just going to come in and trim that off, which I'm going to do in my garbage can at my feet here. And I just got that little stub of marabou sticking out, and I'm tying it in right behind, or right at the tip of that pin. So when I've got this tail tied in, I've got the same profile all the way along the length of the hook. So it helps keep my body nice and balanced. So I've got a nice, smooth, even profile. So I've got the tail in place. If there's a few errant strands here, which there really isn't, I could come in and do some light pinching. But I like the tips to be intact, so I have the natural taper of the fibers working for me, and I just feel that this tail will move and breathe a little better than if I pinched it off. And then I like to add a little bit of flash in the tail. So for this, one of my favorites is this 6904 Flashabou. It's the ice blue pearl, I think they call it. It's kind of got a little bit of UV properties in it, so it'll reflect reflect available light. So I take 2 strands off the package, and what I do with all my Flashabou materials is I cut a little notch into the side of the package here. I don't know if that quite shows up. And I just reach in with my scissors and pull out what I need and actually allow the packaging to sort of keep all this intact. Because if you pull this out of the packaging, it soon becomes a tangled mess, which is good for Flashabou sales, but gets frustrating for you. So I've just moistened these 2 strands together, and I'm going to bring the tying thread forward just in front of the hook point, so it's the thread's out of harm's way. And then I'm going to offer up along the near side of the shank facing me the Flashabou. And I've got enough here to do a couple of flies. So I've got enough that I can fold back. So I take the Flashabou I've got behind the initial tying point, and I just hold it along the side of the hook under a little bit of tension. That'll stop it from rolling around, and secure that down to the base of the tail. And then I'm going to come up again in front of the hook point, take the other 2 strands, fold them on the back side. I can roll that up this way so you can see. And then I'm just going to again hold them and secure them down the far side of the tail. And it's just my tying style is I like my flash to sandwich the tails. And then I come in and I'm going to trim it a little longer than the tips of the tail. So I got a little bit of flash tail, if you will, in there. and just subtle flash. That's all you need. It shouldn't look like a Las Vegas street sign. It's just a little bit of flash to catch the fish's attention. And then the last part of this is we're just going to form a dubbing loop. So how I do it on here, because I have the benefit of the whole shank length, again, I'm going to bring my thread forward, and I'll try and pull this out a little wider so you can sort of see what I'm doing. A little wider. And I'm just going to dull that light down a bit. Right? And then pull this down, and I pulled down about 4 inches. I can't quite get that on camera. I go around my forefinger, and I come back up to the shank, and I just start winding the thread backwards, because what we want to do is close up. You see how the thread here is open, and we want to close that tight. So because I have the advantage of having the distance here, I can wind this back to the base of the tail, and you can see how that thread closes up. Now, another way you can do this, of course, is start it up there and then just pass the bobbin over around around the loop a couple of times, and that'll close it up too. They're both, I tend to use that throw the bobbin around the loop technique when I don't have a lot of distance. But here I have a lot of distance because I started the loop up here and then slid it back to here. But I want to keep this nice and tight because I don't use dubbing wax on this. I'm going to use Arizona semi-seal for the body. And so what I'm going to do now is take a dubbing twister. This is just a Dr. Slick one with a weighted end. And I'm just going to put that in the bottom of the loop. And I'm just going to use thread tension to hold everything in place. So this is the dubbing mix. It's my favorite color of Arizona semi-seal. It's called black blue. That's literally the color. And I'm just going to take a pinch like so. And then I'm just going to mix it back and forth again just to sort of help align the tips and break it apart from being stuffed into the package. And then I just, holding this, I've got a little bit of down pressure on the loop to keep everything under tension. And I just take a little pinch of material. You could easily read through it. Don't put too much in. This is kind of a cumulative effect. So I put it in down at the bottom end of the loop, and I slide it up into position. I find sometimes when people struggle with dubbing loops, they try to open the loop up right here below to add the next piece. And of course, when they open the loop up, this first application falls out, and your second application becomes your first. You pick up the first, and it falls out again, and it just gets frustrating. So by opening the loop down below and sliding up into position, and then using your thumb and forefinger to spread everything out so it's nice and even. You want a nice balanced loop with equal amounts of material, and you can see not a lot of material in there. And I'm just going to keep doing this until I've loaded the loop. And you want to keep your loop manageable. I try to keep them around 4 inches or so because it makes wrapping more accurate. You can place the wraps of this dubbing loop wherever you want it, and it's also easier on your knuckles because you're not banging your hand on the tying bench or the vise base or wherever you're tying. And then we're just going to fill this up. It's kind of off camera a little bit, but that's all full and loaded up, nice and even. I'm going to start by spinning slowly, and for me, I've got to be disciplined with this because I'm left-handed, and I naturally want to spin this direction, but really you want to spin looking down this direction because as you wrap, it's just going to add further twists. So once I get this sort of started, then I can come in with my finger here, or my scissor points, and just give this a hard spin below. And when I take my scissors out, that's going to travel all the way up. And I keep spinning and rotating this, trying to work around the camera here, until the fibers radiate out roughly horizontal like they are here. And if you let go of the tension, you can see that there's a little elasticity to this loop. It wants to almost furl on itself. That's when you know. That's why I like using this nano silk, because it's a thin, strong thread. Because if you use 8/0 or 70 denier, you can overspin and actually break the thread, and then that gets frustrating. So I've got that spun up. Now this mix is a blend of nylon, mohair, which is the long strand stuff. The nylon's in there to soften it a bit, and then the Angelina fiber, which is this flashy accents that are in here. The mohair likes to twist around and get trapped. So before I wrap this forward, I take, you know, a Velcro brush, any kind of dubbing brush. There's lots of them out there. This is Hairline makes this one. And I just start, without dragging the vise all over the camera, I'm just going to pluck at this and free up any trapped fibers and just work all the way down. Basically what I'm trying to do is almost expose the thread. So you are going to remove a little bit of material, but don't worry about it because, again, this all sort of builds up. So hopefully we're staying in focus here. The head of the vise wants to pull around here. See if we can tighten that a bit. And now I've basically got, you know, almost a hackle-like. And you can, I don't know if you noticed, but I kept this part of the dubbing loop bare because I use this to help wrap and guide. I can get a few practice wraps in. I try to avoid situations where I have to make my first wrap as my best wrap. So I get a few practice turns in here and can make sure that loop is positioned so when I wind it up, again, I'm in tight spaces here, my dubbing starts to attach, you know, go around the hook right at the base of the tail. And then just like winding a hackle, I'm going to just wind this around, unwrap in front of the other, and use my left thumb and forefinger to stroke these fibers back. I've just gone through that exercise of freeing them up. I don't want to trap them. So I'm just constantly kind of preening. It's almost like tying a wet fly hackle. You just come in and stroke those fibers back with each wrap. Come up and wrap, and just keep going like this all the way up. And I'll just keep this on a tighter leash so it's not swinging in the way. And just go like this all the way up, just wrapping, using my left thumb and forefinger to sweep back and try to make this as scruffy as you can. And I like, you know, the reason I use the dubbing loop is twofold. It really adds durability because you've twisted that material within the thread strands of the loop. And if you just twisted this around, like just simply twisting dubbing around the thread, which I certainly use that for other fly types, the fish, if you do that, the fish are likely when they grab this to start pulling at it during the fight, and all of a sudden your dub body is slid all the way back along. This is a lot more durable. It provides a scruffy look to the fly, and that when we brush and style this fly at the end after tying it, everything wants to flow back and look nice. So I keep wrapping, and I've actually done it pretty good here. I've got the dubbing, lots of fibers sticking out everywhere. If your fly looks like it fell in the bathtub with a hairdryer, you've got the right look. It should be ugly looking. So we're just going to tie that off, and then come in with my scissors again, using the rear of the blades to basically push and saw through. And then we're just going to take our super glue and use the thread to carry it into the tie-off area. Because if I try and dab this brush in behind the bead, it's just going to get all over the dubbing material and glue it all down and make a mess. So I've got the super glue on the thread. I'm going to come in here like so and just use the thread to carry that right into the base and secure it. And then I'll come in with my whip finisher and put a few added wraps in for additional security. You could probably just let that sit and the glue would harden and it would hold. And we just tie that off, and the tying portion is done. And then all we're going to do is I'm going to aggressively brush this fly on all four sides. I'm actually pulling the dubbing forward, underneath, out, back, and just try to get all of those fibers out like so. And then once I'm happy with it, then I start brushing it back. And that fly is basically ready to fish. Now, if I've got time, right, if I'm doing a bunch of these, you know, I'm not on the water somewhere trying to get back out there to have more of these because I've lost them, I would get a glass of water and I would put it in the microwave for about a minute. And so it's almost to the boiling point. It's hot and uncomfortable to hold the glass. I would take a pair of hemostats or hackle pliers and dip this portion of the dubbing into the water. And that and then just stroke it, moisten my fingers a bit, and do this kind, and that will, what that'll do is everything will go smooth along the fly and takes all the memory out of the fibers. So you get this really nice leech-like profile when it's done, right? So that's styling the fly. So I think when I did the ruby-eyed leech, good friend Brian Chan's pattern on my YouTube channel, I showed how to style that. And I do that with a lot of long strand dubbing. It comes from when we used to tie more with seal's fur, which we still can, and to take the memory out of those fibers as well. But now we use these, this Arizona Semi-Seal is probably my favorite dubbing blend for this fly. There's certainly others out there. There's some, you could do this with ice dub. I think there's a company called Hogfish or something, has long strand dubbing. And a lot of times now it's more driven by color. So the basic bruised leech, which is what this is, was tied originally, and I still do it today, with a gold bead. But I also tie them with chartreuse and hot orange beads for a little bit of attraction. You know, fishing deeper waters or just to, you know, get fish to come over and have a look at it. I tie them in claret, which is burgundy. I tie them with a burnt orange tail and olive bodies, all olive. I even tie olive body with a little collar of orange dubbing. I do it in brown. I call those my olive and brown pumpkins. I do a watermelon red color, which is kind of a really dark olive with red highlights. Just there's so many different dubbing colors. You can blend dubbings. One of the best colors to blend in the Arizona Semi-Seal is take a 50-50 mix of the red Semi-Seal and the black red Semi-Seal, and you get a really nice liver color that's a good fall color for these things. So that's your basic balanced leech. I'll just see if I can figure out where the heck I put my dubbing needle here, and I can show you how it balances. So just let me grab that off camera here. I thought I had done that already. But if I take this out like of the vise like this, and I'm just going to stab the dubbing needle trying to get it not in the way of the lens. But you can see how that fly, it actually hangs horizontally, but a lot of times you will get this fly and it'll hang a little nose down, which is kind of what you want, because when you put this in the water, the buoyancy, marabou actually has some natural buoyancy to it, will tip the fly horizontally. But if your fly is hanging a little this way or a little tail down, that's not the end of the world, because you can imagine under an indicator, this fly is just going to bob. I'm just trying to get my angle going here. It's just going to hang nicely. So this has been, you know, when I'm starting out to fish a lake and I don't know what to tie on, a balanced leech like this color is one of my go-to starter flies to see what's out there. I've used them on trout, walleye, bass, panfish. Everybody likes to eat leeches or likes this leech-like look. So again, the color combinations and beads and colors is just limitless. But this bruise coloration with the black blue is without a doubt my favorite. I have real confidence in this fly. Any questions there? I'll switch to. I'm just going to get the next fly prepped. So we're going to go.
Any other questions?
So this is the Booby. This in still waters, just as in rivers and streams, fish don't always take our flies out of a feeding response, or there's days that they don't seem to want to feed. So we use attractor style patterns and techniques. And the Booby is a pattern. It's an English pattern. It was developed by a gentleman by the name of Gordon Fraser many years ago. And it's, when you see, it's got round foam eyeballs on the front, hence its name. And this fly is tied generally in gaudy, bright, fluorescent colors. It doesn't look like anything that you've seen in an entomology book or out on the water. But this fly shakes and bakes. It wiggles. It rises and falls. It just, frankly, it irritates the fish, and they almost take it out of, fish when we're fishing attractors, I think they're taking these flies out of curiosity. They don't know what it is. Their hands in their mouth, they sample, they're tactile feeders. they'll put their mouth on it, which is fine. That's what we want. Or they're predators. They're aggressive. So it just triggers the kill switch in them, and they grab it aggressively. Or you happen to strip it by a fish that gets too close to its personal space, if you will, and it takes it out of territoriality, defending its space. So this is tied on a number 8. You can also tie them on scud hooks. This is a Daiichi 1530, number 8. You tie them on 8s and 10s, and even smaller now. But the beauty of these attractor flies is you usually don't have to tie them in a host of different sizes. It's kind of one size will work. So this is a number 8. For this thread, I'm actually using Summer Semperfli's Fluoro Bright. We use the white threads now for these because white reflects light, which helps actually magnify. We'll see if I can get this back in focus again. The materials around it, and light reflects off of it. So that's what we're using here. And I'm just going to start winding the tying thread, leaving space at the eye. I'm going to secure this down the shank. And a lot of times you can do thread snaps to break it, but because I'm doing a demonstration camera where everything typically tends to go wrong, I'm just going to be conservative and just cut it off. So I've got the base layer down. I'm going to bring my tying thread back down. So it's about 3/4 of the shank covered. And then I'm going to tie in a short little tail of marabou. Now, this color scheme we're going to use is called tequila. It's got a yellow back end and a fluorescent orange front end, but you can tie them all orange. If you look online or just look in books and stuff, there are more colors of boobies than you can imagine nowadays, because the materials we use for this are just, there's so many color options and different types, it's getting kind of crazy to keep up with it all. But this is a fly I'll actually pinch the tail to length. So I'm just going to take, this is a really vivid lemon yellow or fluorescent yellow UV2 marabou when they still had that, but any bright marabou, I'm just going to strip off. Again, just kind of strip and roll down the shank. And I'm just going to come in with my scissors and trim this just in front of my thumb and forefinger here. Offer it up on the hook like so. On top, 1 wrap, 2 wraps, loose and controlled, and then I apply my pressure on that 3rd wrap. So I'm in control, but by doing that, I find if I apply pressure too soon, it's going to want to push the materials away from me and roll around the shank. And I want to keep this where I want it, which in this case is on the top. So by going around a couple of times like this and then applying pressure, the thread pressure all comes in from all points on the compass at once and just traps it down. So I'm just going to hold that, and then I just a little bit of tension and hold it up on an angle, and that'll stop the fibers from slipping around, and I'm keeping everything where I want it. And I'm just going to go down to about halfway between the point and the crushed down barb, and then come forward again like so. And I'm just going to take and I'm going to pinch this tail. And booby, you can pinch them long. Some tyers like them short. Some tyers don't even tie them with tails. I just like them about shank length. So I'm going to come in here and kind of spread them out a bit and just pinch away that excess, and that'll make this tail pulse a little bit too. And again, if that marabou's getting a little wild and static around there, you can just moisten it with your thumb and forefinger, and that'll just gather it up like so. I'm going to put a little bit of flash in the tail, and this is one of my favorites too. It's called Crinkle Mirror Flash in pearl, but it's quite bright. It's basically Mirage Opal, which is quite bright. So I'm just going to take a single strand, and just like I did on the previous fly, I'm going to secure this along the side of the hook, like so, and then secure the strand behind the tying point along the sides of the tail, closest to me, on the near side I call it, and then come back up, and then fold that over on the back side and secure it again, just sandwiching my tail on either side with the flash, and then just kind of stroke everything together and trim it just slightly longer. I don't put 2 strands in. This flash is quite bright. I don't know if it shows up, but although this fly is quite gaudy and bright, I'm still don't want to overdo things. So the body on this fly is made with fritz or different kinds of chenille, and there's different colors out there. This is called jelly fritz. It's transparent. Some of the original fritz had nylon fibers buried in amongst it. So we're going to use a yellow back end of this atomic yellow, and then a safety orange coloration. So I'm just going to trim out, now I'll show you this material. I'm just going to trim off a short length of it because I don't need much. And the fibers on this particular style are all on aligned to one side, but when you try it in dry, it's all over the place. It's kind of unruly. So what I do is I take a glass of water and I'm just going to dip this in the water to get it wet, stroke the water out of it, and this just makes this way easier to manage. So any of these fritzes or chenilles, and just like any other chenille, I'm just going to take and strip one in to expose the core of the material, like so. I'll just get that out of the way. You can see the core. We're just going to tie that in, and take the thread so it's just forward of the hook point, and then I'm going to start winding this up. So I give it a turn, and every couple of turns I give it a tug. Just add more tension, and you want to pack this in as tight as you can. So one wrap right next door to the other, and just like that previous fly, using your left thumb and forefinger to sweep this out of the way. So right up like so to the tying thread, and then I'm going to sort of come up with my thread, and see how I'm tilting the material horizontally? That makes sure the thread wraps kind of go through the material this way and not across them this way. And then we'll just pull everything back and secure that off, and then come in with the scissors and just trim this excess away. And trimming on the top half of the shank hopefully keeps my thread from somehow leaping into the jaws of the scissors. So we'll just strip all that away. And then the next color is this bright, it's called safety orange, or quite a vivid orange. So we'll just get this out of the package, grab an end of it, and again a similar length, and we'll just dip it in that water again off camera. And then that's moist as well. And then we're just going to come in like we did with the previous one, strip away to the core, bind this in by that thread core, come forward. And don't crowd the hook eye. Leave about 2 hook eye widths. The hook eye is about that wide. I'm going to leave at least 1, preferably 2 hook eye widths bare, because I've got to put a prominent set of foam eyeballs on this thing. So now I'm just going to come around, and just like the previous application, I'm going to come in and push that tight up against and give it a good firm pull. The core on this material is quite strong, and I just want to pack that in as tight as I can, because when this material gets wet, it's quite translucent and you can actually see through it a little bit. So that's why the white thread is in there, and then it's better not to crowd than to crowd. So again, I'm going to come in a little bit horizontal to try and get that thread to go through the fibers, not across them, and then push this back. In fact, I'm going to undo this and go one less wrap, because it's easy to crowd these eyes, the head on this fly, and then get that like so. And secure that back out of the way. And a really good thing to have on hand, and I just forgot to grab it, is a straight edge to cut this stuff. It just makes a nicer, neater, cleaner cut. So a little bit of history on these kinds of flies. If you were to Whip finish this fly right now, with or without the tail. That would be called a blob. And that's a fly that's originally used in a multi-fly team to, one of the reasons you use attractors on lakes is to attract flies to other flies. So this fly is out there, it's large, it's vivid. Trout come in and look at it, maybe eat it or turn away from it, and the hope is they turn in a direction that takes them past a more natural fly, like a hare's ear or a pheasant tail or a midge pupa or a damsel nymph or whatever else, or small leech or whatever. That's a blob. If you put a mop tail on this with a bead, it's called a whatsit. And it's called a whatsit because in England there's a brand of corn chip, or crisps as they call them, that look like a mop finger. So that's where it gets its name from, is the whatsit. And then they also do one with a split foam tail at the back called a foam-arsed blob. Because what was starting to happen is some English fisheries were banning boobies because if you don't fish them properly and fish them static, fish can suck these right down their throats. Because they feel, because your fly, you're not in contact with your fly, it's just sort of suspending there in the water, fish don't feel any resistance and want to inhale it. So this is a fly, when you're fishing it, you fish aggressively. You're always using quick strips, staying tight to the fly so that doesn't happen. If you do that, that won't happen. But if you just let it sit, they can suck it in. So they were banning them on British fisheries where these flies originated. So a Scottish team, because a lot of competitive fishing over there, was able to get around that rule by putting a split foam tail back here. And so it's basically a blob with a split foam tail. And that fly's action, whereas this kind of rises and falls as you retrieve it, the fab kind of pulls straight ahead and then kicks up at the back end. So a different action. It sinks a little faster than a booby. It's a little less buoyant, and it's one of my favorite flies. So if you look up some of these attractors in England, you can see that it gets kind of crazy. So now the signature foam eyes. So you can get these booby eyes, and you can get them a variety of places, online suppliers as well, getting to be a very popular pattern worldwide. And I usually prepare these booby eyes ahead of time. It's something you do prior to tying them in. And they're not super hard foam. You don't want, I don't like really dense foam. But what you would do is you would cut these about 10 or 12 millimeters, or about, in this case, the distance from the hook point to the eye. So I'm just showing you the whole process here. I would come in typically with a straight edge here, but I'm just going to use my scissors and just cut this off. So those are going to be fashioned in to rounded eyes. So what I'm going to do is I just start by taking my scissors, putting the foam into the back of the blade, and just spin and just nip the edge off to help round these. Just like this. Don't remove, just enough to round them. You don't want to take off great amounts of material. And just spin that around, and it's sort of rounded. And then you turn this around in your other hand and repeat the process. So I'm just getting them in the jaws of the scissors, and in this case using my left thumb and forefinger just to spin and rotate this around. And they round the eye so it'll wobble better. There's some argument whether you really need to do it. Okay, so those are done. Now if you want to further round them, there's you can use a Dremel tool to make them nice and round. Some tyers will take this little Tic Tac, some people call it, and put it in a tinfoil tray in the oven for about 10 minutes or so on about 175. Or if you, in a pinch and you want to do it, you can also do it with a lighter, which is what I'm going to do now. Hopefully, and not try and have a 5-alarm fire going here. But I'm just going to come up and just push the foam towards the flame and the heat, and just let it round it a bit. And then just use your finger. So this is the kind of thing you would do, if you'd have a little container filled with these booby eyes, and just pinch them like so. And then what I also like to do is, if I can find my dubbing needle, is I take it, and I can't really show it, but I'll explain it. I put this on the tying area, and I just push hard and roll this to create, and I'll show you what happens when I'm done with it. I push it down on the table right in the midsection and just push and roll, and that puts a little crease right in the center. It's hard to see, but there's a little indentation, and that's so it helps me make sure I get the eyes centered on either side of the hook shank. So to attach these, I'm going to come down and put the tying thread right in that little groove I created with the bodkin and go around once, twice, 3 times, and just twist them right on the thread like so. And those are in place, and then I come in with a little bit of super glue again and just attach that to the thread. And then I'm just going to hold everything back and just basically tread water right up until they roll on top, and then hold them in place. And then I'm going to come through from behind, across and over to the far side of the hook 2 to 3 times, and then do it the same. Sorry, my hands are in the way here. I just got to hold these eyes. So I'm coming up, over, and around and trying to not trap down. I did accidentally trap down some material, but that's not the end of the world. And then come underneath and secure everything like so. Whip finish, and the tying portion of this fly is done. So we're just going to come up, 2 to 3 turn whip finish. 4 in this case is fine. This is why you don't want to crowd the eye of the hook or get some of the dubbing fibers from the previous fly in there. And just snug that tight and trim some of that out, and that's the completed booby. You can add a little bit more super glue for reinforcement on this fly. So I'm just going to take this, and you can, in this case, it's probably best for me to use my dubbing needle to do this, because this, again, this syrupy glue, trying to keep my hands out of everything. Always put the container back on so we don't have a, and I'm just going to take the eyes and push them down, and that'll create a path to work some of the super glue in. And you can also come in underneath and just touch that in there like that for a little added durability. But that's the finished booby. So this is a fly you would, because of the foam eyeballs, it's typically fished on a fast sinking line that drags the fly down, like anywhere from a type 3 that sinks at 3 inches per second to a type 7 that sinks at 7 inches per second. It drags it down, and then you're going to just strip it aggressively, 4 to 6 inch pulls with pauses and short pauses, and then pick it up again. And you can also fish this. I fish these all white versions at the surface. It creates a wake and will pull fish up to have a look. There's also a technique of fishing a multiple fly setup called the washing line, where you would put a buoyant based fly like this one in the point position, and between this fly and your fly line, you would, depending on your regulations or how many flies you can manage, you would put 1 or 2 regular flies off independent droppers in between, and the combination of your fly line choice and your the fly, it suspends those other flies like clothes on a washing line. So it actually helps control the depth of your presentation in a horizontal manner, as opposed to a strike indicator that tends to do it in a vertical manner. If that makes sense. So that washing line technique works really good. And again, the combinations of this fly are literally endless. All orange, peach, yellow combinations, and all that kind of stuff are just endless with this fly. But this is a fly that, again, will catch fish on its own or be used to attract fish to a team of flies. It's just, and the fun thing about this is when it's working, the takes are very aggressive, and they often occur just as you're going to cast. So one of the things in lakes when we fish any kind of stripped fly, whether we're moving it very slowly or stripping it more aggressively, is as we go to initiate the cast, we pause or hang the flies just at the surface. And you'll have fish follow, and as that fly comes up and you raise the rod, it changes the fly's direction and accelerates it a bit. The fish will be triggered to take it because it's escaping and they want to get it. So you'll actually, I tell people in fishing lakes, if you want to jump your catch rate, just fish the hang. As you bring it in, don't be in a hurry to cast again. Pause it. You can do fast raises with the rod, a slow raise. You can pause it for a few seconds. You can pause it for 5, 10 seconds, even longer. Play with the hang time and the speed at which you raise the fly up to the surface and see what the fish like. And you get to see the fish eat your fly right in front of you, which is very exciting. And normally you would have missed that fish because you would have picked the fly out of the water and cast it again. So fish love to follow strip flies for a while, and then that hang motion gets them to commit and eat the fly for you. Any questions about that? About the booby?